right, Damon, thank you for being on the Courage of a Leader podcast today.
Hey, Amy, thanks for having me. And I feel so privileged to be the first now that you're back at the grind from some downtime.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We are going to talk about scaling your business and your impact. Whether you're a business owner or a leader in an organization, how can you expand and scale what you're doing to have more impact, more results? And I wanted to start, Damon, about and ask you about how you think about scaling our
Mm.
impact and our business because you have an interesting approach. You are an SEO expert, you know about online algorithms. So one might think that you're all about the tech in the
Mhm.
solution, but you are really focused on creating meaningful relationships with people. So let's start there. How do you think about scaling one's impact?
Yeah, you're right. It's largely the opposite of what you'd probably assume, and it's more about relationships and networking than tech. So, like to give you some context, so I've had an SEO agency for 17 years, worked with multi-billion-dollar clients, and it's like the bigger the client is, the higher the probability that it came from a relationship. And so, when I look at this, for as established as an agency as we have, I don't run any paid ads. I don't have an email list. I don't do any of these lead gen things, which are great, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of opportunity to be built and expertise established based on how you give first, right? And so, can you give value and build up perceived credibility? Then from there, it drives the reputation and the lead gen for you.
Yeah, I love this, Damon. Many people think that we've got to build trust up over time. And you're talking about this, how do we give value? How do we extend that trust, right? Some effort, share some expertise, something that is valuable to the other person. How did you
Yeah.
come to that belief?
Well, there's an indirect and a direct answer, right? So
Okay.
the indirect is it's largely just how I've historically been. I'm not a salesy person, but obviously I like business and growth and things like that. And so that's kind of the indirect answer. Now, where I
Hmm.
became intentional about it was just a couple years ago. At the time, I was only active on Facebook as a social media platform.
Okay.
And I was good at kind of keeping it moderated and avoiding the drama, but one day I just realized it was unproductive. And so I went to go, I'm just going to delete this then. And we all know that if you delete Facebook, it doesn't really go away. And so I deleted every post I'd ever made, every comment I'd ever made on somebody else's
Wow.
wall, unfriended everybody. She went through and deleted all my private messages. And so I wiped it out
Wow.
before I then hit delete. And
Okay.
what happened after that is I realized, oh, I had this one client that I used to talk that way because I used to keep Facebook private. If a client or lead asked me a question, I would just kind of ignore it. And so then I was like, well, I don't want to turn this on just for one conversation. So can I be intentional about this?
Okay.
And so here's where we kind of come back to your question about when did I start to focus on relationships? And that was part of if I turn this on, I'm gonna turn Facebook on and LinkedIn because that's where my audience is. And how do I give value? A-
Hmm.
And historically, I just talked about my appreciation for my wife and kids and personal things. And then it became, well, how do I still maintain a presence and entertain an audience that is used to friends and family talk without boring them about business and vice versa? How do I start to attract a business audience without boring them about friends and family? And so for the listeners, like this is where you go, well, those things are me. And so those are the things that I authentically enjoy sharing. And as I
Hmm.
started to do that, then started to come the private messages that would say, I really appreciate how you lead family first. I like how you talk about your wife and kids. And so there was all these personal DMs, but then that's where it started to turn into business leads too. And then the business leads, what happens is people will follow you for your expertise, but they convert when they relate to you as a human. And
Yeah.
so when I started putting these things together, I realized free is profitable. And if you just start to give away that expertise, then they trust you because most of us, people can find what you offer online. And so it's not necessarily that you have the answers, it's just that they trust you to implement them and drive a result. So I just started giving away all the answers. Like, we talked about a book, we talked about my posts. I just push everything, and it's like, if you wanna put in the time, more power to you, and then if not, now you know somebody that you can trust that can implement it for you.
Yes, I know you have this philosophy, Damon, and now I'm understanding that it's coming from something that's innate in you. Like you're not a hard closer, right? If this appeals to you, like let's work together. But also giving folks with a need a choice, right? That if you've got more time than money, here's a book I wrote, right?
Mhm.
You can pick that up and spend more time rather than spending the money and engaging with me in a different way.
Yeah.
Really putting them in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I think what's interesting on that topic is that what I've learned is the harder you have to chase a sell, the lower quality of a client retention that comes with that. And
Mm,
so you get into these businesses that have constant churn because they're just focused solely on acquisition, and the acquisition has to offset that churn. When instead, if you
mhm,
focus on quality and relevance and alignment of the lead to your product or
mhm.
service, then you don't have to fight that constant churn, and you have a lot more consistent, stable retention across your clients.
Excellent. I've got some questions, Damon, on how this applies to our listeners who are inside of an organization. I want to pause here for a moment and tell listeners more about you. Over a decade ago, Damon Burton, a husband and a father of three, beat a $1 billion company by outranking their website on Google. From then on, he realized he was onto something great and went on to build an international search engine marketing company that's worked with Inc. 5000 and Shark Tank featured businesses alike. Having started his business right before the 2008 recession, Damon is familiar with navigating and growing a business during confusing times, including tripling revenue during our recent pandemic. Since founding his company, SEO National, in 2007, Damon has been featured in publications including Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, BuzzFeed, and USA Weekly as he helps big and small clients make more in a month than they used to in a year. So that tells you more about Damon's expertise. And I'm excited we're talking about scaling impact today. Thanks for being here, Damon.
Yeah, thanks again. This is fun.
Yeah. So you said some really important words before I shared your bio: quality, relevance, value, right? How do we, as business leaders, as leaders of teams and organizations, how do we connect with others and expand our influence in that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories I can share on the internal side. So half of my team is in the States and half is in the Philippines. And so those are pretty significant, cultural differences. And so it's about how do you align with your team, whether they're above or below you, on the human level. So, for
Mhm.
example, the needs between those two different cultures are pretty substantially different. And so I'll give you an example. The majority of our team on the state side is quality control, copywriters, things like that. And
Okay.
so the what we found is the people that appreciate those roles, we have this big part of our team that's like stay-at-home moms or military wives. And what we found is we can align these goals with that type of team member. And what they're looking for is largely to contribute to something outside of the household, right? They want to feel valued above beyond just being a parent, and then they want flexibility. They just want flexibility of time. I actually just had a Zoom call with one of our content managers last week. She has all this experience in other areas prior to becoming a parent. And so now these friends that she's had for a long time are saying, hey, now that your kids are getting older, what do you think about? Do you think about jumping back into that field? And she says, you know what? No, I really think I enjoy this flexibility and creating my own schedule. And
Mhm.
so there's things that offset uh, just the financial incentive in the workplace.
Mhm.
And so there's an example on the state side. Now, on the Philippine side, there's a big difference in creature comforts, as you said, coming back from traveling, right? You get used to these things, or what's available, or what's the norm in a household. And so a lot of times when we have new team members, I just ask them. I say, "What do you need?" And a lot of times it's really basic things we take for granted. It might be a new
Mhm,
chair, or they don't
mhm,
have a dedicated workspace and they're
mhm,
working on their kitchen table.
mhm,
Or one thing that I've seen some of the greatest reactions of appreciation is an air conditioner, right? Because
mhm,
it's so humid there. And
mhm.
so when we can come at your team and just ask them on a personal level, like, how can I help you? Now, obviously, on the back end, that supports business. But like I said, it's just more innately been something where I'm like, how do we make this a mutually beneficial thing? But
Yeah,
then when you start to realize you can be intentional about this and go, I want to help them be more comfortable in life. It's personally rewarding, but then it becomes tangibly beneficial in their production too.
yeah. What's important to them? What's the norm? What are they used to? What do they need? Those are the questions that I heard inside of what you just said, Damon. And if we're looking at increasing our impact, how can you understand that and align with each individual team member on what they need? And then I'm
Right.
also thinking with your key stakeholders, your key peers, your leadership, what's important to them? What do they tend to focus on? What do they need in order to reach their strategic objectives? I'm working with a leader right now, Damon, and things are busy in her division. And she's having a hard time getting the attention of her colleagues to be
Mm,
able to say, here's what my team is poised to do. Here's how we want to interact with you and provide value inside of
yeah.
the organization. But everybody's so busy, she can't get their attention. And we're talking about like we're creating that chart for her stakeholders. How do I connect with them on a personal level, on a human
Yeah.
level, right? Like what are their strategic objectives? What's important to them, right? So you can find those ways, those topics to really connect in a meaningful way. So Damon, many listeners might think, okay, how do I even get my team members or my colleagues to know that I'm really interested in knowing what they want to do? Right? Many might think like, okay, that's not appropriate. Like I'm not going to bring up with my boss that this is this thing that I would like to do
Sure.
outside of work. How do we get there?
Well, it starts with paying attention, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be cues. We all want to be relatable, and we all want somebody to give us an ear. And so there's opportunities, and if you don't have that radar up, it's over the length of time when that gets shut out. But in the beginning, it's more open, and so you can pay attention to that.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is, people are going to follow your lead to the extent of vulnerability. I can't go, "Hey, Amy, tell me something scary inside."
Yeah.
And so, but what you can do is start on the other side, and you don't have to go like super deep. Obviously, you can kind of ease into this, but when you start showing that vulnerability first, or openness, or just anything, just inviting them into what goes on in your mind and your personal world, then it creates a safe space where they're like, "Oh, okay," and then it starts to plant the seeds where, oh, maybe next week I might be comfortable. I'll tell Amy about this thing. And so it's happening behind the scenes where that trust is being established.
Mm-hmm. Pay attention and go first with vulnerability. Yeah, I mean, as you said that, Damon, I was thinking for myself, I have a really great opportunity right now coming back from having spent a month in another country. Right? How are you doing? Oh, I'm getting used to new rhythms, right? I created awkward moments every day when I was in
Yeah.
France because I was speaking French and you could just see what that might lead to. And also just like not knowing the norms of something. Like,
Yeah.
where is the scanner on this self checkout in the grocery store? I created awkward moments every day. I can share about that in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
right? How is your day to day working for you? Anything that's awkward? Like we can share from our experiences and then have that lead into questions of genuine curiosity
Yep.
for others.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes we try to make it too complicated.
Well, too complicated and too professional, right? I think
Mm,
it's like more social media has a part of this where it's created this perpetual highlight reel. But
yeah, yeah.
when we talk about vulnerability or even as we touched on relationship building and these bigger accounts that I've had the privilege of working with, they come from relationships and vulnerability, right? And so it's actually especially for newer business owners or business leaders, all the things that you're you're usually hesitant about end up being the things that are actually of value to move your career further.
Yeah. So, Damon, I'm someone who doesn't have the best memory. So sometimes I'm present with people in the moment, and then it doesn't always necessarily make it into the long-term memory. So I need to have some systems, some processes, right? To take some notes, right? Have a place where I store that and take a moment to refer to it. Oh yeah, I remember what they were telling me about that. I
Mhm.
know that you have some processes and some systems around networking and making connections. What do you want to share with us about how you do that and what might be relevant to others?
Yeah, so I am blessed and cursed on the memory side of things. So
Mhm.
I am horrible with names and certain things in the moment, but I am awkwardly efficient at remembering. I don't want to say transactional instances, but like when
Hmm.
things happen.
Okay.
So like I'll give you an example. So anytime we have a new client, we're really good at SOPs and documented processes.
Okay.
We've doubled down on that so significantly that we even put in the touch points, right?
What
And
nice.
so the goal though is how do you consistently interact with somebody to amplify the relationship while also maintaining a personal appeal, right? And so
Yeah.
you can't AI all these relationship things. You can't fully automate all these things because at some point they become uh, inorganic, right? And so a lot of times what we'll do is when we have a new client, we send them a welcome kit and we include like these stories in them. And so we'll include stories of success, but what we found to be really powerful is we have a page in there that other clients wrote. So we
Oh,
let other clients evangelize the processes and the results of what's happened and how it took their business from the kitchen or the back garage into a 50,000 square foot warehouse, right? And so these are things that hit differently when they come from somebody else, but they're still personal stories. But then we also document, or in our documentation is send this type of thank you card at a certain point. And
yeah.
so we have it in a process so we don't miss it, but
Yeah.
when we write it, it's personalized. A final example is we'll also evangelize our clients. And so um, sometimes part of our welcome kits will include some of our e-commerce clients' products. And
Nice.
so then we'll share and go, look, this is what we've helped build this brand up, just like we hope to do with you now that we're engaging. And so you can
Mhm.
kind of cross evangelize things which emphasize the business relationship, but then that
Mhm.
also introduces what we talked about on the personal side.
I like that cross evangelize. You're creating these win-win-wins. You're giving an existing customer the opportunity to share about them and their product and service. And of course, their great experience in working with you,
Yeah.
right? So they get to share about what they're up to. It's a testimonial for the work that you do, and you're reaching out and you're welcoming this new client. I'm thinking about how leaders that are internal to organizations can use that same approach. We're having this impact internally. We worked with those folks. Do you know what they're up to? Right? Here's their story, what they were able to accomplish. We'd love to help you in the same ways.
Yeah, there's some fun things that our team's done internally
Yeah.
where so like when our content side of the team gets together, they share highlights of who wrote some of either the most entertaining pieces of content. So we do a lot of content for our clients, right? And so
Okay.
they'll evangelize, oh, Marissa wrote this piece for this client, and look how funny and relevant it was, or look at the impact it had.
Yeah.
Or when we get feedback from a customer, we will forward it to the employee who wrote that piece because the customer
Yes.
doesn't know on the back end which individual team member sometimes wrote a piece of content. And so
Okay.
we can forward that back and forth. But one of the funner things that my team came up with, I can't take any credit for, is we did an internal Jeopardy. And so
Okay.
you can Google Jeopardy generator or something like that, and you can input all these questions, right? And so,
I've made Jeopardy games. Yep.
yeah, so they went behind the scenes. Like I didn't know they were doing this, and they went through and asked other team members that have been with us for a long time, like questions about me, like personal questions, and then about other team members too. And so we get together, and there's funny things like, I'll take you know Damon's history for 500. And then they're going through it and they're talking about like which of the following did Damon used to rock? Bleached
Yeah.
tips, a man bun, and so there's all these it ends up creating this fun conversation of bonding, but
Nice.
then you also find out some of those little intimate things that you didn't know about your team, and then it brings them all together a little bit closer.
You're having fun. You're creating connections. And I like this cross evangelizing, right? Susie did great work on this. Mario did great work on this. Yeah. Taking some time in our team meetings to connect and build each other up.
Yeah.
You were also talking about touch points, triggers, right? I know I've been starting to think as I'm connecting with someone, oh, they're a president at a university that's in Louisiana, right? Mardi Gras is always going to be a big thing to them, right? That's just an excuse to reach out at that
Mhm.
time, right? Put that trigger in my calendar. What other advice would you give, Damon, for a leader of a team in an organization, or even a leader of leaders, right?
Mm.
How do we continue to network in meaningful ways and expand our impact?
I think that on the leaders of the leaders topic, there's a good point on where you kind of left off the last topic where
Uh-huh.
everybody's a little bit different, and so align accordingly. So, a great example is like my COO is super social. He's like a secret weapon. You bring him into any network gathering and you're just like, go free, my little social butterfly, right? And so, he approaches things a lot differently than I do, which has advantages and disadvantages. And so it's like, how do you find the balance of supporting their natural personality? Like he wants to go talk, and so I want him to as well. And then
Hmm.
over time, you find out where the efficiency kind of starts to go up and down. And so, um,
Hmm.
what one example might be, we were at a recent trade show, and he was invited to like this dinner with like 20 people. And I'm like, how the heck does he get, like, at the time I'm like feeling bad for myself. I'm like, he's like, okay, yeah, go have fun. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? Right.
Where's my invitation? Yeah.
But then what was interesting that happened was, then I got invited to a dinner with 5 people. And so
Ah,
then we can see these differences in values. And so there's a time and a place for different personalities that you can amplify them on a personal internal team level and make that person feel special and valuable and contribute. But then it also can move those needles when you figure out where the balance is and where the baton gets passed.
yeah. I'm a big believer, Damon, in people leaning into their strengths and leaning into their own way, their own style.
Mhm.
And it can be really easy when we figure out what works for us. Like, this is terrific, right? And then we want to tell everyone around us, this is how to. This is
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
do, right? And what I'm explaining is what worked really well for me.
Yeah.
And that might not be the thing that works well for you, different leaders that I'm working with. So
Yeah.
again, it's coming back to paying attention,
Yeah.
What's their style? Where are the situations where they thrive? How do they tend to connect with folks? Is it one to many? Is it one on one? Is it in different kinds of situations? And how do you encourage them to uncover and step into their best ways
Yeah.
of networking and scaling and creating meaningful relationships?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's a different way for all of us.
Yeah. Like even though we
Yeah.
might have different styles,
Yeah.
is there overarching guidance to everybody? I mean, some has been pay attention to what's important, what's the norm, what do people need, right? Like how are you going to get their attention? What is going to be important to them? How do you connect in a meaningful way?
What comes to mind is business basics, which is usually A, start, and then
Start, I
and
love
then
it.
and then B, don't stop, right?
Okay, great.
So that also applies in this relationship development and networking.
Yeah,
To your point, there's different ways for all of us, and there's different efficiencies in those different ways for all of us. So I don't think there's a a blanket answer other than you have to try, and
yeah,
then be willing to have some humility and continue with the process to see what does work.
yeah. I'm going to underscore that don't stop, Damon, because it would be really easy. Something doesn't hit the mark in the way that we expect. Right, to not stop,
Yeah,
to try the next thing, right? To own up to the ooh, right? That was the opposite of our intention there.
yeah. I
What
mean,
is
most people
important
are.
to you? Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, and most people are going to be pretty graceful on the first try, right? So if 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 you overstep a boundary, they're generally pretty understanding of the good intentions,
Yeah.
right? And the other thing is though there are business incentives to obviously network and establish relationships, you really have to find a balance of that not being the primary motivator. And so as you're sending out these tokens of appreciation,
Hmm.
don't send swag, right, with
Mm.
your logo all
Yeah,
over
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're gonna brand something, put it with their logo if you're sending stuff to a client,
Cool. Yeah.
or internally, right? Put their face on it.
Yeah, because it's tokens of appreciation, right? What is that recipient going to appreciate, right? What's going to be the interpretation of the gesture over there?
Exactly. Yep.
I love it, Damon. You have shared a number of really important concepts, approaches to keep in mind as we are looking to connect and scale in meaningful ways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is, uh, as we've talked about personability, right? These are the funner conversations to have in these recordings is how do you make an impact on a personal level? And it's just like we talked, there's always a wild card, right? So when you
Mm.
put other people genuinely first, sure, you can use it as an intentional business tool, but where you end up finding the greater impact is some sort of wild card when somebody reaches out later and tells you about the impact that it had on them.
Mm. You hear about the impact and the ripple effects of a reach out, a token of appreciation later on down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Damon. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your expertise on the Courage of a Leader podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.